HP ProBook. It's kind of special among Ultrabooks. The others are making slim ones, using soldered RAM and Type-C ports, but you can't see any of those in the ProBook. It sticks with replaceable RAM and a large amount of ports, but put less value in the thickness. However, ProBook has a bunch of fans for that. The ProBook now is upgraded to a new generation. What are the improvements? Which one should we choose? The iGPU or the DGPU versions? We'll go deep into it in this video. Look at the specs first. The iGPU version gets i5-1240p, replaceable 16GB DDR4 3200 MHz dual-channel RAM, 512GB SN810 SSD, PCIe 4.0x4, 14 inches 1080p 100% sRGB IPS display. And I got a DGPU version with MX570. The i5-1235U CPU is more efficient. Later we'll show you the test result. In terms of exterior, ProBook hasn't changed at all. The lid, base panel and bottom case all metals. The lid has a round HP logo, and can be 180, fully open. The camera on the top has privacy shutter, but the upper bezel is a bit wide. The AUO panel stays the same as the last general. The peak brightness can reach over 450 nit, and the gamut coverage can reach up to 100% sRGB. In terms of color accuracy, the E of both laptops is less than 0.8, which is great, but the max E exceed 5, since one of the blue deviates. I guess the anomaly is caused by test equipments. Due to the pandemic, our professional equipment is stuck in the office, so I have to do the test with an old colorimeter from 2019. As the light filter in it got burned in over times, it'll easily cause deviation over some color. Based on the previous tests where the last general with the same panel performs good, I think the actual color accuracy data should be better. At least for office work, I think it's more than enough. Then let's move on to the base panel. Power button lays between the PART key and the delete key, which easily causes false touch. Arrow keys are a bit weird, so you need time to get used to them. Silent design keyboard, 1.5mm key travel, nice typing experience, nothing surprising on the touchpad. A cube to the right of the base panel looks like a Touch ID, but actually there is nothing functional on it. But glad that the IR camera provide face identification. Finally, let's look at the bottom. Fewer screws, only 5 in total. It'll save a lot of efforts for the disassembly later. 19.8 to 19.9 mm thick, and weighs 1.37 kg. Acceptable weight, but nearly 20 mm thickness? It must be a sturdy one in this year. The exterior is not that appealing, but the thickness also gives it some advantages. The ports. Left side, RJ45 Ethernet port and USB 3.2 General 1 Type A. Right side, 3.5 mm audio combo jack, HDMI 2.1, 2 USB 3.2 General 1 Type As, and a USB 3.2 General 2 full-featured Type-C. A SIM slot in 4G version. You can basically get rid of docking station. Next, performance test. First of all, CPU. The iGPU version is equipped with i5-1240p, and DGPU version goes with i5-1235U. i5-1240p has 4 P cores and 8 E cores, while i5-1235U has 2 P cores and 8 E cores. i5-1240p's TDP is 28W, and i5-1235U is 15W. Same single-core clock speed, but i5-1240p is lower at all-core clock speed. Cinebench R20 single-core. i5-1240p scores 637. i5-1235U scores 653. Their scores are close, pretty much the same with the standard i5-12500H, but much better than 11th Gen i5. In terms of multi-core performance, I ran it on Cinebench R20 in a loop. iGPU version scores higher. 2 reasons leads to this difference. 1. The number of cores. i5-1235U is 2 P cores less, so multi-core performance is restricted. The other one, power. iGPU version mostly maintains 30W power, while DGPU version remains around 24W power. That means, CPU performance is affected by DGPU to some extent. With fewer cores, low TDP, DGPU version lost in the multi-core performance. That's easy to follow. But DGPU still wins at GPU performance. i5-1240p goes with 80EU Iris Z iGPU, while the other one uses MX570 with 30W TDP. Really close to RTX 2050. GA107 cores, with 2048 CUDA cores. Same VRAM bit width, 64-bit, but MX570 only has 2 GB VRAM, and no DLSS or ray tracing. Compared to the previous MX series, MX570 adds support for NVENC and NVDEC codec. A big leap is expected to be seen in video editing or live streaming. Then let's look at the benchmark. iGPU version scores 1202 in TimeSpy, scores 1580 in FSE, scores 747 in superposition. It uses 3200 MHz RAM, so the score is lower than those i5 processor with 4266 or 4800 MHz RAM. DGPU version's graphic performance is way better, which doubled the score, and over 40% higher than MX450. But due to the 30W power, there's a gap to higher-level graphic cards. For CPU conclusion, them have similar single-core performance. But iGPU performs better in multi-core test, while DGPU version does greater in graphic performance. MX570 performs a lot better than last year's MX450. Let's go through the gaming performance. iGPU ran up to 113 FPS in CSGO, but it only got 39 FPS on average in DOTA 2. But for the DGPU version in DOTA 2, 100 FPS. Very smooth. When it came to 3A games, the iGPU version only got 26 FPS. But DGPU version can reach up to 62 FPS. But it's just the lowest setting, so don't push it too much. And 2 GB VRAM is far from enough in 3A games. Another benefit of DGPU is to speed up content creation. We tried to export a 1080p video on these two laptops, and the iGPU version needed 59 seconds, but DGPU version only needed 24 seconds. Although DGPU is weak in multi-core performance, with the help of CUDA acceleration and NVENC codec, it's better than the iGPU version in PR export. ProBook iGPU version is suitable for office works, but it's struggling in games. You can play LOL, but when it comes to DOTA 2, you have to lower the graphic settings. The DGPU version is no problem with playing popular online games, and more competitive in terms of content creation. Next, disassembly. It's quite easy. Unscrew the bottom case. The interior layout is basically the same with the last general. The battery capacity is expanded to 51.3 watt-hours. iGPU version lasted 12 hours 42 minutes in PCMark 10 Modern Office, while DGPU is 11 hours 29 minutes. It's a longer battery life in consideration of a 51 Wh battery. Over the battery is 512 GB SN810 SSD, PCIe 4.0x4, 6,800 MB per second read, 4,400 MB per second write. To the left of the battery preserves an M.2 slot, PCIe 3.0x4, and only fitting for the 2242 hard disk. ProBook remains the RAM slot design. Both of them use Hynix DDR4 3200 MHz RAM. But the iGPU version got single rank, while DGPU has dual rank. So DGPU's read, write speed is higher. The Wi-Fi card is Intel AX211, supporting Wi-Fi 6E. Last, thermals, 2 heat pipes and 1 fan. Let's check out the actual thermals performance. Keep the room temperature at around 23, stress FPU. iGPU version CPU maintains at 84, package power at 30W. For the DGPU version, CPU, 72, package power 20W, IA power, 17W. Because of the DGPU, the CPU power stays more conservative than iGPU's. If stressing DGPU, because of thermal throttling, MX570 was at around 74. The power consumption is around 22W. In dual stress test, CPU package power 16W, IA power 11.2W. GPU, 72, 22W power. We found something interesting. This laptop's GPU shows 30W power at the beginning. A few seconds later, its clock speed stops at 832 MHz, with 22W power. 7 minutes later, the GPU power will be limited at 20W, under which GPU can't reach 832 MHz, but reduces to 600 to 700 MHz. Then it's limited by clock speed and power in turn. So, the stress test shows a wavy curve. Every time when the GPU reaches 74, the power will be limited at 20W. The temperature downs after a while, then it lifts the limitation. For exterior temperature, the general temperature of iGPU version is low. The hottest keycap is 39.7. WASD area is 30. The central part at the back is 34, and the hottest is around 44. But it surprises me a little that it's almost as the same as the iGPU version. Noise. These two laptops are quiet. The fan noise can be heard in quiet environment, but not when there are people talking around. The noise level is predicted to be less than 40 decibels. Very quiet. Generally speaking, I'm satisfied with the iGPU version's thermals. It gets 30W power for the CPU, and does good in exterior temperature and noise level. More acceptable than the 15W version last year. But if it's added with another GPU, this thermals module seems a bit struggling. Whether in stress test or dual stress test, DGPU got only 20W power. I'm sure you've learned about this laptop so far. As usual, we'll list 3 pros and cons. The pros first. Number 1, long battery life. Although ProBook doesn't have a big battery, it has a surprisingly long battery life. In PCMark 10 test, the iGPU version can last 12 hours, and DGPU lasts 11 hours. That exceeds most competitors. Number 2, large number of ports. Ports is always ProBook's trump card. It has 3 USB Type-As, and even RJ45 Ethernet port. Enough for most customers. Number 3, great internal scalability. Normally, Ultrabooks use irreplaceable soldered RAM, but ProBook still keeps the RAM slot design, which can meet some users' requirement. And although it only supports 2242 hard disk, it's one of the few 14 inches laptops that has extra hard disk slot. After the pros, we're gonna talk about the cons. Number 1, weird arrow keys and power button. HP keyboard designers favor some weird designs. The power button is put between the PART key and the delete key, and arrow keys stretch all the way out. It's not very user-friendly. I definitely vote for the regular keyboard layout. Why do they stick to such a unique design? Number 2, it's too thick. Popular Ultrabooks are around 16mm thick, but ProBook is 19.9mm thick. So, it looks too plump to fit for modern tastes. Number 3, empty fingerprint slot. Actually, the last General has fingerprint identification function. But with new face identification camera, this General removed it, but still keeping the small cut covered by a sheet metal on the base panel. It looks weird. That's all for the iGPU version's cons. For DGPU, a bad thermal system will be worse than fingerprint identification. DGPU has improved graphic performance but also the thermals, gapping away the CPU performance from iGPU version. DGPU experienced thermal throttling under heavy load, which is a pity. Finally, we go back to the first question. How should I make my decision between them? Personally, the iGPU version is a highly recommended business laptop for its more competitive scalability and ports. Longer battery life fits for business people. If you do need some games and content creation, MX570 DGPU performs better, although its CPU is a bit weaker with not so ideal thermal system. So, speaking from personal experience, I prefer iGPU because it's pure 30W power while keeping long battery life, replaceable RAM and SSD, large number of ports, low noise. Even though performance doesn't wow me, it's really practical. Plus excellent after-sales service. That's so enough for a business laptop. Alright, that's all for this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you like it. Please give me a like, subscribe or share. If you want more interactions with us, please follow us on WeChat official account. Every day we review a laptop there. This laptop may be a good deal, but all we want is to provide info and guidance. This is Biba Laptops. I'm Jawan. See you next time.